Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined by Sean Gibson, who is the great-grandson of Negro League great Josh Gibson. Sean, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Glad to be on your podcast.
Absolutely. So we first met. We were talking before we started recording sometime around 2009, 2010. One of my just recent guests on the podcast, Paul Cartwright, had booked you to come speak at the Berkshire Baseball Banquet, and we kind of stayed in touch through social media since then. And looking at guests, and I'm like, you know what, Sean would be a great guy to have on the podcast, considering we're the 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues. You are the executive director of the Josh Gibson Foundation, so I think in addition to what's going on in America racially today, I think this is a pretty poignant conversation to have. So, first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself and the foundation, how you became executive director, and what is the mission of the Josh Gibson Foundation.
Yeah, well, great. Like you said, we met, I think it was like 2009, 2010. It's great to still be. That's the one thing about social media. You can always keep in touch with people. Before social media, you always had to make sure you call someone every now and then, or just check in on them. But now just get social media. So I'm glad we stayed in touch, and I appreciate this interview.
No problem.
So as you mentioned, I'm the great grandson of Josh Gibson. I got involved with the foundation in 1990. My grandfather, Josh Gibson Jr., actually started the foundation. Josh Gibson Jr. also played in the Negro Leagues as well. He played in Canada. He played for the Homestead Grays the last year, 1949, 1950. And, he always just wanted to make sure that his father's legacy stayed alive. And not just his father's legacy, but the other great Negro League baseball players. And, of course, the two great teams right here in Pittsburgh, which is the Crawfords and the Grays. So that was his idea to come up with the Josh Gibson Foundation. I got involved with the foundation once I graduated from college from Edinburgh University in 1995. And once I got involved, that's when I started adding all the educational components, fundraisers, our baseball organization. And I just wanted to get more kids involved. And right now we have over 300 kids involved in our program. Between academic programs, we have our BOSA, Business and Sports Academy, which is a high school curriculum program. We have our summer camp. We have our Boys and Men mentoring program. We have our STEAM program. So we've grown a lot since 1990. And, of course, we give out our scholarships to seniors that's going into college. So, since 1990, we have grown a lot, and we're very excited to be able to serve the city of Pittsburgh and to be able not only serve the city, but also just let the people know about the history of these great men. When you talk about the Pittsburgh Crawfords and the Homestead Grays, I mean, you're talking about two of the greatest teams. I don't want to say Negro League, I say in baseball in general. You talk about the 1935 Crawford team. They had 5 Hall of Famers on that team, with Josh and Satch, of course, leading the way. Then you had Oscar Charleston, Cool Papa Bell, and Judy Johnson. And then you talking about the Homestead Grays, where they won 9 pennants in a row. So we talking about greatness of 2 great teams right here in the city. And for us, it's been great because Josh played for both. He didn't have to go nowhere. He didn't have to go to Detroit or Chicago to play for a team. He played for 2 great teams right here in Pittsburgh. So, so it's just great for us to be able to carry on the legacy and make sure that we teach the youth about what these guys had to overcome and the adversity they had to overcome just to be able to play the game of baseball.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I'm obviously a huge baseball guy, and big on the history of the game. So even as a young person, I followed the history of the Negro Leagues, and really trying to understand the place we were at in society at that time. And your great grandfather passed away on January 20th, 1947, a few months before Jackie Robinson actually broke the color barrier. So he never really got to see, baseball be integrated. And I know, I've had the pleasure of meeting guys like Wilmer Fields and Mudcat Grant, and hearing their stories, about everything that they had to overcome just to play this great game of baseball. and I think it's awesome that you guys are really looking to preserve that and to make people understand that legacy and the struggle that people simply because of their skin tone weren't able to play Major League Baseball. At what point in your own life did so your grandfather wanted to really preserve his dad's legacy, but at what point did you find, this is something that I want to continue to preserve is my great grandfather's legacy and make people understand that? I mean, was there like an aha moment for you or anything like that?
Yeah, it's funny you said that. You mentioned Wilmer Fields. So when I was in college, I went to Edinburgh University, and when I was in college, my grandfather used to go on these baseball circuit, these autograph circuit, where it'd be former Negro League baseball players as well as former Major League Baseball players. They would go around the country signing autographs. And they had one in Manassas, Virginia, which is where Wilmer Fields is from. And I'm probably my sophomore year in college. So I'm like maybe 19, 20 years old. And my grandfather's there. I remember Pete Rose being there. Back then, it was a lot of Negro League baseball players were still living. Wilmer Fields, of course, was living. Malin Duckett, a lot of these guys, Willie Pope. And I remember this is my first time going to a Negro League autograph session. And in my opinion, I thought I was going to see a lot of African Americans there. And it wasn't. It was a lot of Caucasians that knew the history, seemed like better than some African Americans. And the aha moment for me was when a white gentleman walked up with his son. His son had to be about 7 years old. And he told his son, he said, "Hey, this is Mr. Gibson. This is Mr. Gibson's, the one he was telling me about. This is Mr. Gibson's son." And this little kid, man, just started talking about Josh Gibson like he was related to Josh Gibson. And I think at that point, I'm like, wow, if I go home and if I ask a 7-year-old African-American kid about Josh Gibson, would he know as much information as this kid did? And that was the aha moment for me. It was like, listen, I need to get back to my community and educate these African-American kids about Josh Gibson as well. So that there, and that had to be, like I said, that was my sophomore year in college. I graduated from college in 95, so it had to be, 93, 92, around that time that happened. So that was the one moment that, made me realize, like, hey, this is one thing. Because I never really thought I was going to run the Josh Gibson Foundation. My degree's in criminal justice, so I was looking into law enforcement. But I think me traveling with my grandfather, that gave me a better understanding of the Negro Leagues and hearing those stories. Because I used to, double duty Radcliffe. I mean, a lot of guys, that's when I first heard that people say I look like Josh Gibson was from former Negro League baseball players. They said, "Hey, man, you kind of look like Josh Gibson." And double duty Radcliffe was the first person that ever told me that. So being around those guys, hearing their stories and hearing what they went through. And let me just say this, when I tell the story about this, it's not bitter stories. These guys had great stories. I mean, there was no stories where from my recollection, I never heard a guy say, I wished I played in the majors, or, the majors did this, or Bowie Kuhn was this, or whoever. I've never heard these guys has anything bad to say. They've always talked about they loved it. You know what I mean? They enjoyed it. They had a great time, So that was my aha moment. And I think that's what made me get involved with the foundation, just being around those guys and traveling with my grandfather, be able to hear the stories and be able to talk to the players and get that passion, get that love. Because I was getting it from my family, but it's a greater passion when you hear from other players and what they've been through and how they talk about Josh. It's different when, of course, my grandfather's telling me stories about Josh Gibson, but when you got Malin Duckett and Leon Day or Buck Leonard or somebody telling you, then that's a totally different atmosphere, because these guys actually played and lived with my grandfather and was around him and really saw the real Josh Gibson play the game. So that was my aha moment right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love, that was one thing and obviously, like I said, I've only met a handful of players, but I remember, Wilmer Fields saying that exact same thing. He had nothing bitter to say about not being able to play in the major leagues. He was just like, look, we were playing the game we loved. We were playing the game we loved. And, for them to really be able to, be grateful, and make the best of a not great situation, I think is something we can, probably all learn from. So We mentioned at the start, this is the 100th year anniversary of the start of the Negro Leagues. And obviously, I know you've been posting a lot of stuff on social media about that. What are one of the things you want people to, really recognize about, the times of the Negro Leagues?
Well, one thing that I definitely want people to know is that, and I think he doesn't get enough credit, is Rue Foster. When you talk about the Negro Leagues, even with the Centennial, you very seldom hear Rue Foster's name being brought up. And for people who don't know who Rue Foster is the guy who actually was the mastermind who created the Negro Leagues. And to me, in my heart, I feel as though he never created the Negro Leagues, there'd not have been no Josh Gibson or a Satchel Paige or a Cool Papa Bell. So that's first and foremost. I want people to recognize Rue Foster. And then after that, it's more or less like, hey, this is, we call baseball America's pastime. Well, this is it. We're celebrating the 100-year anniversary of the Negro Leagues. Yes, some of these players played in the majors, but majority of these players never played in the majors. And there were some great players that played in the Negro Leagues. Unfortunately, because of their, like you said, the tone of their skin, and at the time, the commissioner, Bowie Kuhn, decided not to integrate Major League Baseball with African-American players. We never had a chance to see some of the greatest black players play against some of the greatest white players. And I get to this conversation a lot of the time when people compare Josh Gibson to Babe Ruth, and I say Babe Ruth's the white Josh Gibson. But the reality is that how can you say Babe Ruth is the greatest baseball player ever when he didn't play against black baseball players? And there's no way I can say Josh Gibson's the greatest baseball player ever, but he never played against white baseball players. Now, I could say Josh Gibson is one of the greatest of the baseball players, and Babe Ruth is one of the greatest. But in that era back then, you can't say some of these guys are the greatest, Honus Wagner, whoever it may be, because they didn't play against the black baseball players. So, but getting back to the Centennial, this is a big year, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, a lot of things have been slowed down or on hold or postponed because of the pandemic. And as far as our events, we just recently decided to go ahead and postpone all our events until 2021 because of COVID. So we are doing some events on social media. We have our Josh Gibson Centennial page where we do weekly stories, just keeping people updated on the history of the Negro Leagues. We'll be doing some interviews with some family members of Negro League baseball players coming up soon as well, interviewing some former players. This is just mainly just let people know about the great history of the Negro Leagues, and also, too, not to forget about the Centennial. So those are some of the things that we're doing right now. But overall, 1920 to 2020, February 13th was the actual founding date, 1920. And, like I said, I just want people to really recognize Rue Foster. Rue Foster was a mastermind behind this. And, without him, it may not have been a Josh Gibson.
Yeah. And I think the real, like you said, the real injustice of the Negro Leagues was the fact that, there is that gap where you can't make a true comparison as to who the real great players were, because we had, the greatest white players and the greatest black players. And how cool would it have been to see, Babe Ruth and Josh Gibson go up against each other, or, some of these guys. I mean, it's just, it's incredible, and I think that's the real injustice, is that, as a fan and a true lover of baseball and the history of baseball, we were stripped of a time where we couldn't really see the best of the best play against each other, but there's nothing we can do about that now. So we can just
exactly
remember the legacy of what all these guys did, and their love of the game in general. So what's the future of the Josh Gibson Foundation looking like right now? I know obviously right now it's, get through the pandemic is, the immediate future, but long term, I know you guys got some big plans. Why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, so right, like you said, the future for us is, number one, is just, it's looking great. We got some big things that we're trying to get down the pipeline. One of our main goals is to actually have our own facility. Right now, we're in 3 sites. We're in 2 Pittsburgh public schools, and we're actually in 1 City of Pittsburgh Parks and Rec. So we have 3 sites. But our ultimate goal is to have our own facility along with a miracle field. Our goal is to create a miracle field in the inner city of Pittsburgh because most of the miracle fields in the surrounding area are in the suburbs. And, we feel as though is that, there's minority kids that are handicapped who would love to play baseball as well. So that's our main goal. We hit a bump in the road with some politics in an area called McKees Rock, Pennsylvania, where we were looking to get a old football field, and politics got involved, and we were denied the space. But as I always say, being a Gibson, we're used to, not saying used to, but my grandfather went through a lot. And if he could overcome certain things back in the 1930s and 40s, we can do the same thing as well. So we're not going to give up. But that's our goal. That's our future goal, is to have our own Josh Gibson Youth Academy with the Miracle Field.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great goal. 'Cause I know, back when I was with Berkshire Baseball and Big Vision Foundation, we had a local special needs school here in the area, the John Paul II Center for Special Learning. And twice a year, we would have those kids come out. We didn't have a miracle field, so we just did it on a regular, dirt baseball field. But when you see those kids out there and playing that game for the pure love of the game, it's incredibly heartwarming. So I love to to see that come to fruition for you guys, because it's a great mission to have for sure. And then you said earlier, obviously with the pandemic, a lot of the events for the Centennial have been canceled or postponed, pushed back into 2021. You guys are looking to have a tournament in 2021. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the three events that we're planning on for this year was our Josh Gibson Youth Classic. And this was going to be ages 11 through 12 tournament where we're bringing teams from other cities to represent the Negro League team. So example, we had Kansas City coming in, they'd have been the Monarchs. We had Cleveland coming in, they'd have been the Buckeyes. We had the Washington, D.C. coming in, they'd been the Washington Homestead Grays, and so on and so on. So it had been 12 teams at Josh Gibson Field here in Pittsburgh, and all the teams were wearing Negro League uniforms. And then all the awards were going to be named after Negro League baseball players as well. So it was going to be a great event. And not only, the one thing that we do with our invitational tournaments is that it's not just about baseball. We also have a lot of workshops where we educate the kids on Negro Leagues and some other things that's going on. We have some local universities come and speak to the kids. We have some local speakers come speak to the kids. So it's a well-rounded event. It's not just you come in and play baseball and you go back to your hotel and go swimming all day. You actually got to go attend some workshops and get some education while you're here. So that will be postponed till next year, in June of next year. Then this year also we was having our symposium, which we was going to do at Duquesne University. And the topic was going to be, what does the Negro League mean to you? We was looking to bring in guest speakers, national speakers, to be on the panel, to be participating in that. And that may still happen virtual. We're looking into maybe doing something in October virtual as a roundtable discussion with some high-profile guest speakers. So that may be in the works. But next year we'll do that live. And then our main event, our main fundraiser is our gala. So we do a black tie gala every other year, and we give out an award called the Josh Gibson Legacy Award. And our previous recipients have been from Juan Marshall, Lou Brock, Reggie Jackson, Barry Bonds, Clemente family. So all these guys have actually come in and received the award, which is great, because that's one of our stipulations is that, if you accept the award, we'd like you to come in. And, it's been great to have some of those guys to be able to represent Josh Gibson and give them the Josh Gibson Legacy Award. So next year, we're hoping to bring another high-profile recipient, as well as bring in some other former baseball players. We also give up something called the Gibson Awards. And the G is for government, the I is for civil service, the B is for business, S is for sports, O is for community, and the N is for education. So those are to local community leaders that we also give out awards to as well. So that's what we're looking. So all that right now is postponed due to the pandemic. Is postponed to 2021. But as I told my board, some situations you can't control, like this one, and we'll be okay for 2020 and just get ready for 2021 and have a great year. Hopefully we don't get a second wave of this pandemic, and we can go ahead and start planning for 2021.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about, we've talked about some of the things, during segregation, where white players weren't allowed to play with black players. And here we are, 100 years after the Negro League started, over 60 years after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball. And, we've made some progress racially, but I think recent events here in 2020 have really shown us glaringly that we've got a lot more progress to make. So what are some of your feelings personally about some of the racial tensions that are going on in our country today?
Yeah, it's just, the blunt is sad, to see some of these African-American men lose their life, and women lose their life senselessly, but to police officers. And I think that, because people always ask, well, why do you think the George Floyd murder kind of took it to another level? Because there's been other ones, Gardner and, other people that, Tamir Rice and all these people that have died. And, and I think I think African Americans are just getting, fed up with this. It's just like, these police just use their power and just kill African Americans like it's nothing. And to me, watching that video, just seeing that guy's demeanor of how he just had his knee on his neck and had his hands in his pockets, just like he's a normal day, like, okay, so what? This guy's on the ground screaming, not screaming, but pleading for his life, pleading for him to get off my neck. I can't breathe. You're killing me. And he's just there, just like nonchalantly and I think that video really helped, opened up a lot of people's eyes and just like, wow, this is really going on. And this guy has no care in his body about what he's doing to this person. And, to me, the guy's, once he's dead, he still got his neck. I mean, he still have his knee on his neck. You can tell somebody's not breathing. We're all human. We know the feeling. I mean, and I think that just really sparked this movement. And not just, locally, but nationally and in world, across the world. We've seen these peaceful protests. Well, in the beginning, it was kind of unpeaceful. People were upset, and then with the young kid in Atlanta who got killed by the two white guys when he was jogging, all that kind of happened. And it's just like one big ball of a storm hit. And, I think now we're getting a lot of, the difference I will say for me, I see is that you get a lot of white people standing up. And that's the difference. When Trayvon Martin died, you had LeBron James and some of the NBA players and NFL players. And of course, Colin Kaepernick was trying to do his thing back then. But you didn't see a lot of white people standing up. And I think this is the difference now. I think, especially celebrities and athletes, politicians, you see a lot of white people standing up. And I think that's what it's going to take to make the change. And as you mentioned when you first brought this up, I've been on different podcasts and different TV shows and talking about this subject. And for me, it's just like, wow, here we are celebrating the centennial, 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues. And the same things that we're going through now as African Americans, the same thing that my grandfather went through 100 years ago. And that's crazy. And I'm hoping that my grandkids their grandkids don't go through this another 100 years from now. So, it has to stop eventually. And, hopefully it seems like it's going in the right direction, but it's still a long way to go. And again, we get the right people in place. And the one thing I would say, if anybody's watching this, is that if you're out there protesting, we love it. But, bring that same energy to the polls in November. I think that's where we're going to really need it, where it's going to count, because it starts from the top. And, we need that same type of energy. We need those same young people that's out there protesting and marching and Black Lives Matter. We need you all to come to the polls in November, and all your votes count. As African Americans, you hear a lot where some people feel as though You know, it doesn't matter if they vote or not, you know, but there's one time we could not vote, and don't take it for granted, you know. So you get the privilege to vote, you know, exercise that right and vote, man. So that's where we stand on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, what you brought up there is, I think the one thing that really changed, with unfortunately this time around, with watching that video of George Floyd lose his life, is the longevity of that video. And I think, for me, and I've said this on a lot of, this has been a topic on a lot of my most recent podcasts. And I've said this before, is that, for me, I think when you look at the Eric Garners and the, Tamir Rices and those guys, it was almost as if the video was too fast, that you hear a gunshot and then this kid drops and it's over. And when you got to sit there for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and slowly watch this man's life extinguish, and again, looking at the cop's demeanor, is incredibly heartbreaking. I mean, it took me a couple times to watch the video before I could get through the whole thing. And I think that is the thing that, that made this a little bit different than in the past. And, you mentioned about how many white people are out there protesting as well. That was another thing for me personally. I've been fortunate to be brought up in a family where my parents taught me that people are people, and some of our best friends when I were growing up were African Americans. And, my parents went over to their house and we played and had fun and had dinner with them. And they came to our house, and it never really, was anything different than if we went to white friend's house, But when this happened, I reached out to a lot of my friends that are black, and, I was like, look, for me, I realize it isn't just enough to not be racist. You really have to be anti-racist now. And that's why, this is probably the fourth, fifth, sixth podcast that, this topic of race has been talked about, because I think it's something that people need to hear. I don't think there's enough people who look like me who recognize our privilege of simply being white. And I think it's something that we need to talk about. We need to talk about, why are there no Nazi monuments in Germany, but we have all kinds of Confederate monuments here in the United States? It just doesn't make sense. So, we celebrated when the Berlin Wall came down. I think we need to start celebrating when some of these Confederate statues come down for sure as well. So, it's one of the reasons why I definitely am bringing this up with a lot of my podcasts. That's got to be at the forefront. It can't be something that, we can forget about. And that was a privilege as a white person that you don't necessarily recognize, is that in all these past instances of police brutality and innocent black men and women getting murdered on the street, we could, post our Martin Luther King quote and then go on with our lives. But you can't. You've got to face it every day, whether you want to or not. So it's one of the reasons why I'm definitely, going out of my way to make it a topic of the forefront of the conversation, to make things change, because we do need policy change. People need to show up at the voting booth in November, but there's things we can do individually before that to help make things better. Number one is just recognize everyone's, own humanity. If we just start looking at each other as human beings first and foremost, I think that's a big step in the right direction, and being able to have these conversations, these uncomfortable conversations about it.
Yeah, and I think too is that what's going to stop this is that these police got to be held accountable, and I think that's why it's been done so much, because if you notice, nobody has really been held accountable. Some people may lose their job, which okay, or nobody really goes to prison behind this. So hopefully this guy goes to prison, and but if they're held accountable, and I think that's what it is, they feel like they can do it because they're the law and they get away with it. You know what I mean? But until they're held accountable and start going to jail, then maybe the cops will think twice before they do it. So
yeah, and I think when you look at the reaction of that cop's face, whose knee was on George Floyd's neck there, I think his facial reaction said it all.
oh yeah,
Nothing's going to happen to me.
I mean, he had that nonchalant attitude, like. I mean, like you said, and you read it. You said it's the video. It was 8 minutes and 47, 46, 47, whatever, over 8 minutes long, and you can just tell, like watching it. I'm watching. You can see the guy's dead. He's not moving, and you still had the audacity to leave your knee on his neck. It was just like, wow. Then he just walked away, like, go back to the office, like another day. So, yeah.
All right. So we're just about out of time. Any last things you want to mention about the foundation? You talked about the upcoming events. I'll put a link up here if people want to make donations. They can do so online, so I'll make sure I have a link. But if anybody wants to reach out and get involved in any of your events, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah. So you said you're going to put our link to our website. The best way to get a hold of us, any volunteers, any educators. Right now, one of the things that we're doing is we're transitioning to virtual our programs. So we have a few teachers that's on our board, and we have a few teachers that are volunteering with us. We can always use some educators to bring their great minds, especially IT people, because virtual is going to be a new thing going on right now. But yeah, you can always just go to our website, which is www.joshgibson.org. Hit the contact us button, and one of our interns will receive that and forward it to me. But we've always looking for volunteers. And when I say volunteers, it's not really volunteer what we're doing. We also look for great ideas. I always tell our volunteers, just don't come in and volunteer based on what we're doing. If you think you can make the foundation better, if you have some great ideas or some great fundraising ideas or great programming ideas, share those. We always tell our volunteers that, just don't come in and volunteer what we're doing already. If you have some great ideas, please feel free to share. So, we're always looking for that. We're a small nonprofit, so everything helps, especially with volunteers. People's time is just like money. It's not always about the dollars and the cents. It's about people's time too, and people's creative minds that can also help out. So, but yeah, just visit the website, joshgibson.org. And in the meantime, you can follow us on social media. Josh Gibson Foundation Facebook page, Josh Gibson Foundation Instagram page. Just got on Twitter. Sean Gibson is Josh Gibson _1911 on Twitter. We've been doing contests on Twitter. We've been giving out DVDs and giving out, just trying to get people more engaged in the Negro Leagues and Josh. So, I never thought I'd be on Twitter, but I'm on Twitter, and so far it's good. But yeah, those are some of the things we're looking to do. But I guess the ended up on our end is that just remember the history of the Negro Leagues. This is a part of not African American history. This is a part of American history. And I feel as though that it should be taught by not just by African Americans, but white as well, and all races. And these guys were great baseball players, and they played back in a time where they were denied to play the majors, but still overcame adversity, and was still able to become great baseball players. And Josh is the second baseball player inducted to the Hall of Fame in 1972, which is behind Satchel Paige in 1971. And I don't know if people notice or not, but a lot of people, especially myself and our family, we credit Ted Williams that helped get these great baseball players to the Hall of Fame, because in 1966, when Ted Williams went to the Hall of Fame, he mentions in his speech that he hopes one day that the great players of Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige be inducted to the Hall of Fame. I believe if he don't make that statement, it may not happen as sooner as 71 and 72. So, so those are some of the things I think that we don't really recognize as well. Those small things like that, like I said about Ruth Foster and Ted Williams' speech. Those are some things that are small but big in a way that it helped generate a whole nother atmosphere for Negro League baseball players.
Yeah, the other thing that I want to point out that I just learned within the last 2 years is, we talked about how, the conversations that you've had and that I've had with some of the former Negro League players, there was no animosity within them. They were just grateful that they were able to play a game. But one thing I want to point out is that the Negro Leagues actually integrated long before the Major Leagues did, that there were white baseball players in the Negro Leagues. And I think that, again, is a testament to just the fact that with everything that was being done to oppress those players, not just on the baseball field, they were still, but in society in general, they were still, if someone was going to help them win a game, they didn't care what this guy could say, they didn't care what the color of his skin looked like, So the fact that there were white players in the Negro Leagues, years before there were black players in the major leagues, I think is an incredible testament to the character of the individuals that ran the league and played in the league, for sure.
So that's a great point, because being that, we have an African-American name, Josh Gibson, and sometimes I get called from white families and say, hey, is this foundation or your program just for black kids? And my quote is always to the person on the other end. I said, if that was the case, we'd be doing the same thing that Major League Baseball did to Josh Gibson. So to answer your point, no, it's not just for black kids. It's for anyone, whoever wants to participate. And one time I said this to this lady, and she said, what did you say? I said, if we were not accepting white kids, we'd be doing the same thing that Major League Baseball did to Josh Gibson. And she said, do you mind if she was a school teacher. She said, do you mind if I use that in my classroom?
Feel free, right?
Just give me credit. Just say you got it from me. But that's the truth. We'd be doing the same thing that Bowie Kuhn did to my grandfather, Satchel Paige. So we know our programs, like you said, it's open to anyone who wants to participate. Boy, girls, white, black, Asian, any race, disabled. We don't discriminate at all.
That's awesome. So, as I told you before, I always ask all my guests one final question. The subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People, Many Little Places, which is derived from a Michael Franti song called Gloria. The opening lyrics are, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. So, what are one of the things that you like to highlight that you're doing to make the world a better place today?
Well, as far as me, myself, and the foundation is just, carrying the legacy of Josh Gibson. That's my little thing. I feel as though, especially here in Pittsburgh, if I wasn't carrying the legacy, a lot has been done in the city behind Josh Gibson, and a lot of people will give the foundation credit for that. I mean, between Josh Gibson statues, Homestead Grace Bridge, Josh Gibson monuments, Josh Gibson murals, Josh Gibson being recognized in the city of Pittsburgh as one of the top 50 of greatest Pittsburghers of all time. So, our little thing for me was just making sure that we carry on the legacy of Josh. And it became a bigger picture here in the city of Pittsburgh because, one thing I would say about Pittsburgh, we're a sports town. We love our sports. We love our three major sports, Penguins, Pirates, and Steelers. But they understand the history of sports. And you can't mention the Pittsburgh sports history without talking about the Homestead Grays and the Pittsburgh Crawfords. So for us, my little piece of history is making sure that we continue on the legacy of Josh Gibson and make sure that his name never dies here in Pittsburgh as well as across the nation.
That's awesome. Well, Sean, again, I thank you so much for taking the time out to join me today. And as I told you, I've told everyone when I do a podcast with him, it's the first of two. And the next one we do will be in our RV or sitting outside of our RV out there in Pittsburgh with you and having a conversation, a follow-up conversation to this. So looking forward to that day and wish you the best of luck in the foundation moving forward and the events you have planned for 2021. And, again, just thank you for taking the time. I think Josh's story and the Negro League story in general is a story that, not only baseball players, baseball fans need to hear, but America needs to hear. This actual podcast, everything's pre-recorded, but this will actually be released on opening day of the 2020 shortened baseball season. So I think that's, kind of fell into our favor as well. It's said a lot of things don't go planned, but when they come together, they come together nicely for us. So again, appreciate the time, and look forward to meeting you out there in Pittsburgh and having another conversation. So folks, as always, check out my other podcasts and blogs at danclouser.com. Thanks again, Sean.